The helicopter blades cut through the Caribbean air as another group of guests arrived at Sterling Island. Vincent Sterling stood on the marble terrace of his estate, watching the parade of wealth descend upon his private sanctuary. His hands were steady, his expression unreadable, but inside his chest, his heart hammered with a rhythm that had nothing to do with nerves and everything to do with the choice he had made 6 months ago. Below him, the wedding venue stretched across manicured lawns that rolled toward crystalline beaches. White chairs formed perfect rows, and orchids imported from Thailand hung in cascading arrangements that must have cost more than most people earned in a year. 300 guests had accepted his invitation, though he suspected most came out of curiosity rather than affection. Vincent Sterling, the man who had revolutionized cloud computing and built a fortune before 35, was famously private. His romantic life had been a subject of speculation for years, filled with brief relationships that never led anywhere meaningful. Until Natasha. That was the name on the invitations, the name whispered in gossip columns for the past 3 months. Natasha, the mystery woman who had captured the heart of the man many called untouchable. No one had photos of her. No one knew her last name. The speculation had reached fever pitch, with theories ranging from European royalty to a secret Hollywood actress seeking privacy. Vincent's best friend and business partner, Thomas Chen, appeared at his elbow. "You sure about this?" Thomas asked, his voice low. "It's not too late to call it off." "I'm sure," Vincent replied, though the words felt heavy on his tongue. "No one even knows who she is. The board is furious. Your mother won't stop calling me." Thomas paused. "And you won't tell me anything either." Vincent turned to face his friend, his gray eyes reflecting something between determination and resignation. "You'll understand soon enough." The string quartet began playing, signaling the start of the ceremony. Vincent made his way down the terrace steps, his tailored charcoal suit fitting perfectly, his movements controlled. He took his position at the altar, which was framed by an arch of white roses and facing the ocean. The sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, creating the kind of backdrop that wedding planners dreamed about. Guests settled into their seats, designer dresses rustling, diamonds catching the fading light. Vincent recognized most of them. Tech moguls, investors, celebrities, politicians. People who had benefited from knowing him or wanted to. Their faces showed polite interest, but their eyes held calculation. Everyone wanted to know who had managed to tie down Vincent Sterling. The music shifted, and the crowd turned. At the far end of the aisle, a figure appeared, draped in ivory silk that caught the breeze. The dress was elegant, but not ostentatious, with long sleeves and a high neckline. The veil was thick, traditional, completely obscuring her face. She walked alone, her steps measured and graceful. Vincent's jaw tightened as she approached. With each step she took, his past rushed forward to meet his present. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind countless times, but nothing had prepared him for the actual weight of it. She reached the altar, and the officiant, a judge Vincent had known for years, began the ceremony. The words washed over the crowd, traditional and timeless, but Vincent barely heard them. His attention was fixed on the woman beside him, on the slight tremor in her hands that only he could see. When the judge finally said, "You may now lift the veil," the entire gathering seemed to hold its breath. Vincent reached forward slowly. His fingers grasped the delicate fabric, and he lifted it with deliberate care. The veil fell back, and for a moment, time fractured. "Celeste." Morgan stood before him. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. Someone dropped a glass, the sound of shattering crystal punctuating the shock. Cameras clicked frantically, though security had been instructed to confiscate any unauthorized photos. Celeste Morgan. The name alone carried weight and scandal. She was the sister of Julian Morgan, Vincent's former college roommate and business rival. 5 years ago, Julian's startup, Quantum Solutions, had collapsed spectacularly amid allegations of fraud and embezzlement. The scandal had destroyed Julian's reputation, cost hundreds of people their jobs, and sent Julian himself into reclusive exile. Celeste had disappeared shortly after, vanishing from society so completely that most people assumed she had left the country. Yet here she stood, her dark auburn hair falling in waves past her shoulders, her green eyes meeting Vincent's. With a mixture of defiance and vulnerability, she was thinner than he remembered, her features sharper, but she was unmistakably herself. The girl who had once laughed at his jokes during college barbecues, the woman who had stood beside her brother through his downfall, the person who had every reason to hate Vincent Sterling. "Hello, Vincent," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough for those closest to hear. Vincent's expression remained neutral, though his mind raced. "Celeste," he acknowledged, the judge, flustered and clearly not briefed on this particular development, cleared his throat. "Shall we continue?" Vincent nodded once. The ceremony proceeded, but the atmosphere had transformed from curious to electric. Whispers buzzed through the crowd like angry hornets. Vincent could see Thomas's face, pale with shock and confusion. His mother, seated in the front row, looked as though she might faint. Board members exchanged alarmed glances, already calculating the public relations nightmare this would create. Through it all, Celeste remained composed. When the judge asked if she took Vincent to be her husband, she answered with a clear, steady, "I do." When Vincent slipped the ring onto her finger, their eyes locked, and in that moment, they shared an understanding that no one else could penetrate. This marriage was a transaction, a carefully negotiated arrangement born from desperation and pragmatism, but it was also something neither of them had anticipated: a reckoning. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent leaned forward and pressed his lips to Celeste's forehead, a gesture that appeared tender but felt more like a seal on a contract. The crowd erupted into uncertain applause, the sound thin and forced. As they turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, Celeste whispered, "No going back now." "There never was," Vincent replied. They walked down the aisle together, past faces frozen in shock and judgment. The wedding reception awaited, along with questions that demanded answers and a past that refused to stay buried. The reception hall glowed with candlelight and tension. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across faces that struggled to maintain polite expressions. Guests clustered in small groups, their voices low and urgent as they dissected what they had just witnessed. The shock of seeing Celeste Morgan at the altar had transformed what should have been a celebration into something closer to a scandal. Vincent and Celeste stood near the entrance, greeting guests with the mechanical precision of actors in a play they had rehearsed but never quite believed in. Each handshake, each forced smile felt like walking through fire. Some guests offered congratulations with barely concealed skepticism. Others simply stared, their eyes moving between Vincent and Celeste as though trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Margaret Sterling, Vincent's mother, approached with the graceful fury of a woman accustomed to controlling every aspect of her world. Her silver gown shimmered as she moved, but her eyes were ice. She kissed Celeste's cheek with lips that never touched skin, a performance for watching cameras. "We need to talk," Margaret said to Vincent, her smile never wavering. "Immediately." Later, "Mother," Vincent replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Margaret's composure cracked for just a moment before she recovered. "You have made a terrible mistake," she whispered, then glided away to manage the social disaster unfolding around them. Thomas appeared next, his usual easy confidence replaced by confusion and something that looked like betrayal. "What is happening?" he demanded quietly. "Celeste Morgan, after everything with Julian? Vincent, this makes no sense." "Trust me," Vincent said simply. That's what you keep saying, but you won't tell me anything. Thomas shook his head. The board is going to lose their minds. Half of them invested in quantum solutions. They lost millions when it collapsed. Celeste spoke for the first time since entering the reception. Then perhaps they should be interested in the truth about what really happened. Thomas looked at her with surprise, as though he had forgotten she was more than just a scandal standing beside his friend. Before he could respond, Vincent guided Celeste away, his hand firm on the small of her back. They moved through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries that meant nothing, until Vincent led her to a private balcony overlooking the ocean. The sounds of the reception faded behind closed glass doors. Out here, the waves provided a rhythm that felt more honest than anything inside. Celeste pulled away from Vincent's touch the moment they were alone. She gripped the balcony railing, her knuckles white. "They all hate me," she said quietly. "They don't know you," Vincent replied, standing a careful distance away. "They know enough. They know my brother's company failed. They know people lost everything. They think Julian was a criminal." Her voice cracked slightly. "They think I disappeared because I was guilty too." Vincent moved beside her, his eyes on the darkening horizon. "Is that why you came to me 6 months ago? To prove them wrong?" Celeste turned to face him, her green eyes fierce in the fading light. "I came to you because you were there. You were Julian's partner before everything fell apart. You know the truth about what happened, even if you won't admit it publicly." "I've told you what I know," Vincent said carefully. "You told me pieces, fragments, enough to keep me interested, but not enough to prove anything." Celeste's voice rose slightly. "That's why I agreed to this arrangement. You promised me access to the files, to the evidence that could clear Julian's name. That was the deal." Vincent turned to her, his expression unreadable. "And in exchange, you agreed to marry me and keep quiet about what you discovered before you disappeared." The words hung between them, heavy with implications. 5 years ago, Celeste had been working as Julian's chief financial officer when Quantum Solutions collapsed. She had spent weeks digging through records trying to understand how their company had gone from promising startup to bankrupt disaster overnight. What she had found terrified her enough to vanish completely, changing her name and hiding in a small coastal town where no one knew Vincent Sterling or Julian Morgan. "I found the transfers," Celeste said quietly. "The ones that showed someone was systematically draining our accounts and making it look like Julian was stealing. I found emails, authorization codes, everything that proved Julian was being framed." "But you couldn't prove who was behind it," Vincent finished. "Not without access to your company's records. Whoever did this worked through Sterling Tech's systems. They used your infrastructure to hide their tracks." Celeste's eyes searched his face. "I thought it was you for years. I thought you destroyed Julian because you were jealous or competitive or wanted to eliminate a rival." Vincent's jaw tightened. "But then you found something that changed your mind." Celeste nodded. "A pattern. The same kind of suspicious transfers started happening in your accounts about 2 years ago. Small enough to hide in the vastness of your company's finances, but there. Someone was stealing from you the same way they stole from Julian, just more carefully." "Richard Palmer." Vincent said the name like a curse. Richard Palmer. Vincent's chief financial officer and trusted advisor for over a decade. The man who had helped build Sterling Tech into a global powerhouse. The man whose signature appeared on every major financial document in the company. The man who was currently inside the reception, smiling and shaking hands as though he had not engineered the destruction of lives and fortunes. "I couldn't prove it alone," Celeste continued. "I needed your resources, your access. But I also knew you would never help me unless I had leverage." "So you threatened to go public with what you knew," Vincent said. "You threatened to reveal that Sterling Tech's systems were used to commit fraud, that my company was complicit even if I wasn't personally involved." The scandal would have destroyed everything I built, and you would have lost everything, just like Julian did. Celeste's voice softened slightly. But then you surprised me. Instead of threatening me back or paying me off, you proposed marriage. Vincent allowed himself a small, bitter smile. A marriage gives us both what we need. You get complete access to my resources and protection from Palmer if he realizes you're investigating him. I get your cooperation and your silence until we have enough evidence to act. And publicly, it looks like a love story instead of an investigation. Some love story, Celeste murmured. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their arrangement settling over them. Inside, music started playing, signaling the first dance. Neither moved. I need to ask you something, Celeste said finally. When you and Julian were partners in college, when you worked on that first project together, were you really friends? Or was it all just business? Vincent considered the question carefully. We were friends, he admitted. Real friends. What happened to him destroyed me too, even if no one believed that. Then help me save him, Celeste said urgently. Help me prove he wasn't the villain everyone thinks he was. Before Vincent could respond, the balcony doors opened. A man stepped out, older, with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Richard Palmer. There you are, Palmer said warmly. Everyone's waiting for the first dance. You can't. Hide from your own wedding reception. Vincent's hand found Celeste's, his grip firm and protective. We were just getting some air. Palmer's eyes moved between them, calculating and cold despite his friendly demeanor. Of course, it must be overwhelming, especially with such a surprising bride. He looked directly at Celeste. I knew your brother, you know. Terrible what happened to him. Such a waste of potential. Celeste's face remained neutral, but Vincent felt her fingers tighten around his. Thank you, she said politely. Palmer smiled, wider. Well, don't let me interrupt. Enjoy your evening. He disappeared back inside, leaving a chill in his wake. He knows, Celeste whispered once they were alone again. Maybe, Vincent replied, or maybe he's just being careful. We need to be more careful, Celeste said. If he suspects anything before we have proof, then we play the part perfectly, Vincent interrupted. He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. We convince everyone, including Palmer, that this marriage is exactly what it appears to be. Unexpected, impulsive, and real. Celeste looked up at him, and for a moment something flickered in her eyes that had nothing to do with their arrangement. And how do we do that? Vincent leaned closer, his voice low. We start by dancing like we mean it. He led her back inside, where hundreds of eyes tracked their every movement. The band began playing a slow waltz, and Vincent pulled Celeste into his arms. They moved across the floor with a grace that surprised them both, their bodies finding a rhythm that their minds had not yet accepted. As they danced, Celeste rested her head briefly against Vincent's shoulder, a gesture that looked like affection but felt like survival. And Vincent, despite knowing this was all part of their carefully constructed lie, found himself wanting to protect the woman in his arms from everything that was coming. Across the room, Richard Palmer watched them with eyes that missed nothing, and smiled. 3 months had passed since the wedding that shocked the world. The media frenzy had eventually died down, replaced by newer scandals and fresher gossip. To the outside world, Vincent and Celeste Sterling appeared to be settling into married life with the expected awkwardness of any newlyweds navigating their new reality. They attended charity galas together, smiled for photographs, and maintained the perfect facade of a couple learning to coexist. Behind the walls of the Sterling estate, however, something far more complex was unfolding. The West Wing study had become their war room. Every evening after the household staff retired, Vincent and Celeste spread documents across the mahogany desk, tracing financial records that dated back 7 years. Bank statements, wire transfers, encrypted emails that Vincent's tech team had painstakingly decoded. Each piece of evidence brought them closer to understanding the full scope of Richard Palmer's betrayal. Celeste sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by printouts, her hair pulled back in a messy knot. She had abandoned the designer dresses and perfect makeup that she wore in public, comfortable enough now to let Vincent see her as she truly was. A forensic accountant by training, she had a gift for finding patterns in chaos, for seeing connections that others missed. "Look at this," she said, holding up 2 documents. Palmer created shell companies in the Cayman Islands, but he was smart. He never used the same company twice for transactions over $50,000. Small amounts spread across dozens of entities, all flowing back to a central account. Vincent moved to sit beside her on the floor, something the billionaire version of himself 3 months ago would never have done. "Can we trace the central account?" "I think so, but we need access to his personal banking records, not just the company files." Celeste rubbed her tired eyes. "We're close, Vincent. I can feel it." He reached over and gently took her hand, a gesture that had started as performance but had become genuine somewhere along the way. "You should rest. We've been at this for 6 hours. Celeste looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. The distance that had existed between them on their wedding night had eroded gradually, worn away by late nights working together, by shared meals where they talked about everything except their arrangement, by moments of unguarded laughter that surprised them both. "I can't rest," she said quietly. "Julian calls me every week, and I have to lie to him. I have to tell him I'm still searching, that I haven't found anything yet. He doesn't even know I married you." Vincent's expression darkened with something like guilt. "There's something I need to tell you about Julian." Celeste tensed. "What about him?" "I've been sending him money, every month for the past 4 years, enough to live on, to pay for his apartment, his expenses." Vincent met her eyes. "I couldn't clear his name without proof, but I could make sure he survived while I searched for it." Celeste pulled her hand away, shock and confusion warring across her face. "You've been helping him all this time?" "He was my friend. My best friend before Palmer destroyed that too." Vincent's voice carried a pain he rarely allowed to surface. "When Quantum Solutions collapsed, I knew something was wrong. Julian was brilliant and careful. He would never have been so reckless with finances. But I couldn't prove anything. And the more I dug, the more I realized someone was setting him up using my company's systems." "So you've been investigating this for years," Celeste said slowly, processing this revelation. "Yes, and when you appeared 6 months ago with your evidence with proof that the same pattern was happening again, I finally had a chance to catch him." Vincent reached for her hand again, his grip urgent. "I didn't marry you just to protect my company, Celeste. I married you because together, we could finally save Julian." Tears welled in Celeste's eyes. "You should have told me." "I know. I'm sorry." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of shared purpose settling between them. Then Celeste leaned forward and kissed him, a kiss that had nothing to do with their arrangement and everything to do with the feelings that had been building despite their best efforts to keep them at bay. When they pulled apart, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he murmured. "I know," Celeste whispered. "But it did." The next morning, their breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Thomas appeared at breakfast with a flash drive, his expression grave. "You need to see this," he said, glancing at Celeste with newfound respect. Vincent had finally told Thomas the truth 2 weeks earlier, and his friend had thrown himself into helping them gather evidence. The 3 of them huddled around Vincent's laptop as Thomas opened the files. "Palmer made a mistake. He authorized a transfer yesterday from one of his shell companies directly to his personal account, $2 million. He's getting sloppy, probably because he thinks he's untouchable. Celeste's hands shook as she scrolled through the documents. This is it. This connects everything. We can trace every fraudulent transaction back to him now, including the ones that destroyed Julian's company. Vincent was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling the federal prosecutor. We have enough to bring charges. The next week moved with the speed of a hurricane. Federal agents descended on Sterling Tech, armed with warrants and evidence that Celeste and Vincent had meticulously compiled. Richard Palmer was arrested at his desk, his carefully constructed empire of theft crumbling around him. The news exploded across every media outlet, but this time the story wasn't about scandal. It was about justice. Julian Morgan's name was cleared publicly, the evidence showing conclusively that he had been framed. The federal prosecutor issued a formal apology, and the business community that had shunned Julian began reaching out with opportunities and amens. Through it all, Vincent and Celeste stood together, facing cameras and questions with a united front that no longer felt like pretense. On the night after Palmer's arrest, they sat on the same balcony where they had revealed their arrangement months earlier. The ocean stretched before them, dark and endless. Julian wants to see me, Celeste said. He knows everything now, about Palmer, about our investigation, about us. Are you going to tell him the truth about our marriage? Vincent asked carefully. Celeste turned to him, her green eyes reflecting starlight. What is the truth, Vincent? We married for practical reasons, but somewhere along the way, this became real. At least for me. Vincent pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with a certainty that had taken months to build. For me, too. I fell in love with my wife, Celeste. Not the arrangement, not the investigation partner. You. She kissed him then, deeply and without reservation, and when they pulled apart, she was smiling. Then I'll tell Julian that I married the man I love, because that's the truth now. 1 year later, they renewed their vows in a small ceremony on the same beach where they had married the first time. But this time, there were no secrets, no arrangements, no ulterior motives, just family and close friends watching as Vincent and Celeste promised themselves to each other again, meaning every word. Julian stood as Vincent's best man, his friendship with Vincent restored and strengthened by everything they had endured. Margaret Sterling, who had gradually come to admire her daughter-in-law's strength and intelligence, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. When Vincent lifted Celeste's veil this time, there was no shock, no gasps, no scandal. Only love reflected, in both their faces, and the knowledge that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. As they kissed, the small gathering applauded, and the ocean waves whispered their approval. What had started as a contract born from desperation had transformed into something neither of them had believed possible, a partnership built on trust, a marriage rooted in genuine love, and a future they would face together. The billionaire's wedding had indeed shocked everyone, but the real surprise was not who stood behind the veil that first day. It was discovering that two people, brought together by circumstance and necessity, could find in each other exactly what they had been searching for all along. Not revenge, or vindication, or protection, but something far more valuable. A love that was worth every risk they had taken to find it. The end.